Hi, everyone. I'm Don, and welcome back to True Crime Revealed, the podcast where we uncover some of the darkest and most chilling stories from around the world. Today, we're diving into a case that shook an entire nation, a story straight out of a twisted thriller, but tragically all too real. It's the shocking tale of Marcos Matsunaga, one of Brazil's wealthiest businessmen, who vanished without a trace in 2012, right on the brink of a billion-dollar deal that could have redefined his career. At first, the disappearance sparked wild speculation. Was it a kidnapping orchestrated by ruthless business rivals? A calculated move to sabotage the deal of a lifetime? But as the investigation unfolded, the truth turned out to be far more sinister than anyone could have imagined. This is a story of ambition, betrayal, and a horrifying act of violence that left the entire country reeling. So grab your headphones, settle in, and join me as we unravel the shocking mystery of the Marcos Matsunaga case, a true crime story that's as haunting as it is unforgettable. To truly understand this case, we need to delve into the lives of the two central figures, Marcos Matsunaga and his wife, Alice Matsunaga. Their vastly different upbringings and personalities formed the foundation of their turbulent relationship, which would ultimately end in tragedy. Let's start with Marcos Matsunaga. Marcos was the heir to a thriving food empire, Yoki, a company founded by his grandfather, Yoshizo Kitano, who immigrated to Brazil to build a better life. Yoki grew from a modest flour mill to a global food brand, and Marcos inherited the fruits of his family's labor. Described as a talented yet difficult man, Marcos was a shrewd businessman who multiplied his family's fortune several times over. But his success in the boardroom was contrasted by his struggles in personal relationships. Arrogant, controlling, and egotistical, he often alienated those closest to him. Despite his wealth, charm eluded him, and he frequently sought companionship through escorts rather than forming lasting bonds. And then there's Alice Matsunaga, a woman with a vastly different story. Alice grew up in one of Brazil's most crime-ridden neighborhoods, enduring an abusive childhood and struggling to escape the cycle of poverty. With dreams of a better life, she worked as an escort to fund her law studies, determined to leave her troubled past behind. It was through her escort work that she met Marcos, a man who saw in Alice something beyond her circumstances. He divorced his first wife and married Alice, bringing her into a world of unimaginable wealth and luxury. Together, they had a daughter, a moment that seemed to promise a brighter future for them both. But beneath the surface of their glamorous lifestyle lay deep cracks in their relationship. The very traits that had drawn them together, ambition and resilience, would soon become the catalyst for their undoing. At first glance, the life of Marcos and Alice Matsunaga seemed like a dream. Together they lived in a world of unimaginable luxury, an elite lifestyle filled with extravagance and indulgence. From their stunning apartment with panoramic city views to their shared hobbies, the couple appeared to have it all. Marcos was an avid collector of rare and exotic items. His home boasted a massive wine cellar stocked with bottles from around the world, and a secret room filled with firearms and edged weapons, treasures he took great pride in. Alice, in an effort to strengthen their bond, embraced some of his more unusual interests, like hunting. The two spent time at shooting ranges, and Alice learned to handle firearms with surprising skill. She even joined Marcos on hunting trips, stalking and killing game in the wilderness. On the surface, these hobbies might have seemed like a shared passion, but they were more reflective of Marcos's dominance in the relationship, an effort to mold Alice into the perfect companion for his interests and lifestyle. The couple's struggles with fertility added another layer of complexity to their relationship. After years of trying to conceive naturally, they turned to in vitro fertilization, or IVF. Their perseverance was finally rewarded with the birth of a daughter, a moment that seemed to solidify their happiness as a family. Alice appeared to embrace her role as a mother, and for a while their life seemed picture perfect. But even with the bodies of parenthood, their marriage was far from stable. Marcos's work commitments became all-consuming, especially as he prepared for a billion-dollar deal that would transform his career and solidify his legacy. His days were filled with back-to-back meetings, consultations, and planning. He often didn't come home at night, leaving Alice alone in their upscale apartment. For Alice, the loneliness was suffocating. Despite the luxurious surroundings, she felt increasingly isolated. Her husband's growing absence only amplified the distance between them, and the cracks in their relationship grew deeper. Behind the closed doors of their opulent lifestyle were lingering resentments, unspoken frustrations, and a growing emotional void. The Matsunagas lived a life that many would envy: luxury, status, and success. But wealth cannot buy happiness, nor can it fix a marriage weighed down by control, ambition, and mistrust. The stage was set for a devastating unraveling, one that no amount of money or prestige could prevent. At first glance, their shared hobbies, such as hunting and keeping exotic pets, might have seemed like a testament to their connection. Together, they skinned game animals, handled deadly firearms, and even housed venomous snakes in their sprawling home. But these activities, more like extensions of Marcos's eccentric passions, were only surface-level distractions from the deeper cracks forming in their relationship. For Alice, the reality of being Mrs. Matsunaga was far from the Cinderella story she might have envisioned. Marcos's controlling nature overshadowed every aspect of her life. He dictated how she should behave, criticized her past as an escort, and frequently reminded her that she owed her position to him. But perhaps the deepest wound came from his inability or unwillingness to remain faithful. Marcos's affairs were not just indiscretions, they were blatant demonstrations of power. The most recent, with Natasha Lima, cut especially deep. Natasha, another escort Marcos had met online, was younger and received lavish gifts, including a car. Marcos didn't even bother hiding the affair. He flaunted it. He took Natasha to the same restaurants and entertainment venues he had shared with Alice, seemingly daring the world to notice. By the spring of 2012, Alice was nearing her breaking point. Marcos was consumed by the biggest business deal of his life, a billion-dollar transaction that could make him a financial legend. His schedule left little time for family, and he was often away from their upscale apartment in the heart of Sao Paulo. When he was home, the tension between them was palpable, with frequent arguments erupting behind closed doors. Then came May 19, 2012, a day that would change everything. According to Alice, Marcos left their apartment that evening for a late-night business meeting. He had promised her that his success was just around the corner, that soon their lives would change for the better. But as the hours stretched into the next morning, Marcos didn't come home. He didn't call. He didn't answer his phone. Alice reported him missing the following day. At first, speculation ran wild. Had a rival orchestrated his kidnapping to sabotage the billion-dollar deal? Or was this the work of criminals targeting one of Brazil's wealthiest men? But as the investigation began to unfold, it became clear that something far more personal and far more sinister was at play. Marcos Matsunaga, one of Brazil's most prominent businessmen, vanished without a trace on the night of May 19, 2012. His disappearance left a nation in shock and sparked a wave of speculation. A man on the brink of closing a billion-dollar business deal doesn't simply disappear, not without leaving questions in his wake. It was his wife, Alice Matsunaga, who first reported him missing. According to Alice, Marcos had left their luxury apartment in Sao Paulo that evening for an important meeting. He was supposed to return by morning, but when he didn't show up and his phone went silent, Alice said she became worried and contacted the authorities. Her story painted a picture of a strained marriage weighed down by infidelity and betrayal. Alice claimed that earlier that evening she and Marcos had a heated argument. She confronted him with photos and videos of him with another woman, evidence she had obtained from a private detective. The woman in question was Natasha Lima, a younger mistress Marcos had been seeing for months. Alice alleged that after their explosive fight, Marcos packed a bag and stormed out of the apartment, claiming he needed space. She assumed he had gone to his office or possibly even to Natasha, but investigators were skeptical. Surveillance footage from their apartment complex quickly contradicted Alice's story. The tapes revealed that Marcos returned home that evening carrying a box of pizza. He took the elevator to the apartment, and that was the last time anyone saw him alive. The footage showed no evidence of Marcos leaving the building that night or at any time after. Instead, it was Alice who became the focus of attention. The next morning at around 6 a.m., she was seen on the surveillance tapes again. This time, she was struggling to wheel 3 large suitcases out of the apartment. The footage clearly showed the bags were heavy, Alice could barely maneuver them down the hallway and into the elevator. The sight of those suitcases raised chilling questions. Where was Marcos? And more importantly, what was in those bags? As investigators dug deeper into the disappearance of Marcos Matsunaga, the story Alice had so carefully crafted began to unravel. What initially seemed like a tragic case of a missing businessman now pointed directly to his wife, and the evidence painted a far darker picture than anyone could have imagined. The key to understanding what happened lay in the surveillance footage from the Matsunaga's luxury apartment building. As police pored over the tapes, they confirmed that on the evening of May 19, 2012, Marcos returned home carrying a box of pizza. He entered the elevator, made his way to their apartment, and was never seen leaving again. This discovery directly contradicted Alice's account. She had claimed that after a heated argument over his infidelity, Marcos had stormed out of the apartment, allegedly heading to his office or possibly even to meet his mistress, Natasha Lima. But the footage revealed no such exit. Marcos had entered the apartment and vanished into thin air, or so it seemed. Then came the footage from the following morning. At around 6:30 a.m., Alice appeared on camera, struggling to move 3 large suitcases out of the apartment. The bags were visibly heavy, and Alice was seen dragging them into the elevator with great difficulty. Her demeanor was calm, calmer in fact than one might expect from someone whose husband had just disappeared. When confronted with this evidence, Alice's story began to change. Investigators pressed her on the timeline, and the contradictions became impossible to ignore. Then came the most damning revelation of all, the discovery of Marcos's dismembered remains. Found in garbage bags discarded in a remote area 50 kilometers outside Sao Paulo, Marcos's body had been meticulously dismembered. Forensic experts described the cuts as precise, almost surgical, indicative of someone with a strong knowledge of anatomy. The chilling detail immediately raised red flags about Alice's potential involvement. As a former nurse, Alice had the anatomical expertise to carry out such a gruesome act, and her shared hunting experiences with Marcos, where she had learned to skin and butcher animals, added another layer of suspicion. But the most horrifying revelation came from the autopsy itself. Blood was found in Marcos's lungs, indicating that he had still been alive during the dismemberment. He had been breathing, trying to stay alive, as his body was being cut apart. Confronted with these findings, Alice finally cracked. She admitted to killing Marcos, but claimed it was not premeditated. According to her, their argument had spiraled out of control. She described years of emotional abuse, humiliation, and Marcos's controlling behavior. On the night of the murder, she claimed he had slapped her, and in a moment of blind rage and fear, she grabbed a gun and fired. But investigators weren't convinced. Forensic evidence contradicted Alice's version of events. The bullet's trajectory revealed that Marcos was seated or lying down at the time he was shot, completely unaware of any immediate danger. There were no signs of a struggle, no defensive wounds, no physical evidence to suggest that Alice had been attacked. And then, there was her behavior after the murder. Alice didn't panic or call for help. Instead, she methodically dismembered Marcos's body, packed it into suitcases, and transported it out of the apartment, all while her young daughter slept in the next room. Her calm demeanor on the surveillance tapes was not that of a woman acting in self-defense, but of someone who had taken careful steps to conceal a crime. Alice's confession may have answered the question of how Marcos died, but it left a much larger question unanswered. Why? Was this a crime of passion, or had Alice carefully planned to eliminate Marcos before he could divorce her and leave her with nothing? The trial of Alice Matsunaga was nothing short of a national spectacle. The courtroom became the stage for a gripping battle between the prosecution and defense, each presenting a starkly different narrative of what happened on the night of May 19, 2012. At the heart of it all was the question, was this an act of self-defense or a cold-blooded premeditated murder? The prosecution's case was clear and damning. They laid out a meticulous timeline of events that contradicted Alice's claims. Surveillance footage proved that Marcos never left the apartment after returning home with pizza, debunking her story that he had stormed out after an argument. Instead, they argued Marcos was ambushed and killed by his wife in a calculated act to eliminate him before he could divorce her. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence came from Natasha Lima, Marcos's mistress, who testified that Marcos had confided in her about his plans to divorce Alice. He had shared his intentions to move to Florida after the sale of his company, taking his wealth with him and leaving Alice behind. The prosecution argued that this revelation gave Alice a strong motive to act. She had everything to lose. But the most damning evidence came from the forensic findings. Pathologists revealed that Marcos had been alive during the dismemberment, a horrifying detail that painted Alice's actions in an even darker light. Blood found in his lungs proved he was breathing as she began cutting him apart, a detail that shocked both the jury and the nation. The precise nature of the cuts, coupled with her background as a nurse and her shared hunting experience with Marcos, underscored the argument that this was no act of desperation. It was methodical and deliberate. Alice's defense team countered with a narrative of emotional abuse and psychological torment. They portrayed her as a woman pushed to the brink by years of humiliation, control, and infidelity. According to Alice, the murder was not premeditated, but a tragic culmination of years of mistreatment. She claimed she acted in a moment of uncontrollable rage and fear after Marcos allegedly slapped her during their argument. However, the evidence simply didn't support her story. The bullet's trajectory revealed that Marcos had been seated or lying down, completely unaware of any immediate threat. There were no signs of a physical altercation, and witnesses described Marcos as controlling but never violent. The precision of the dismemberment and Alice's calm demeanor during the disposal of the body further dismantled the defense's argument of an impulsive act. After weeks of testimony, the court reached its verdict. Alice Matsunaga was found guilty of premeditated murder with particular cruelty. The judge cited the calculated nature of the crime, the attempt to conceal it, and the pathological findings as key factors in the decision. Alice was sentenced to 20 years in prison, a punishment many felt was too lenient given the brutality of the crime. Critics argued that the sentence failed to reflect the sheer horror of what had been done. With Alice behind bars, the case came to a close, but its impact lingered. The Matsunaga family was forever shattered, and Marcos's young daughter was left to grow up without her parents. The trial laid bare a story of betrayal, greed, and unimaginable cruelty, a tragic end to what had once seemed like a life of privilege and success. As the courtroom emptied and the cameras stopped rolling, one question remained: could this have been prevented? Or was the Matsunaga tragedy inevitable? A chilling reminder of how love, wealth, and power can so easily turn into a recipe for disaster. The Matsunaga case was not just a murder. It was a window into a chilling tale of manipulation, betrayal, and premeditation. Beneath the surface of a seemingly perfect life of wealth and privilege lay a relationship consumed by greed, control, and unresolved trauma. Marcos Matsunaga was a man of immense fortune, born into a legacy of success, but even his vast wealth could not shield him from the consequences of his choices or the fatal relationship that would end his life. For Alice Matsunaga, the path from a difficult, poverty-stricken upbringing to a life of luxury came at a cost. Her story is one of ambition that turned into desperation, and desperation that gave way to a crime of unimaginable cruelty. At its core, this case serves as a stark reminder of the destructive power of unchecked greed and control. Marcos's desire to dominate every aspect of his life, including his marriage, created a relationship built on imbalance and resentment. Alice's own insecurities and fear of losing the life she had fought so hard to obtain pushed her to make choices that would destroy her family forever. This tragedy forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about the human condition. How often do we see relationships unravel, not because of external forces, but because of the turmoil within? How many times do unaddressed traumas, unchecked egos, or deep-seated fears lead to irreversible decisions? The story of Marcos and Alice Matsunaga leaves us with more questions than answers. Questions about trust, power, and the consequences of betrayal. But perhaps the most haunting lesson is how easily the veneer of success and stability can crack, revealing the darkness that lies beneath. Thank you for joining me today as we explored this harrowing case. It's a story that reminds us of the fragility of the human spirit and the devastating impact of choices made in anger, fear, and greed. If you found this story compelling, be Be sure to subscribe to the podcast for more true crime cases that dig deep into the human psyche. Until next time, take care of yourselves. And remember, the most chilling stories are often the ones that hit closest to home.